Welcome to this episode of the weekly News Roundup. In latest news coming in from Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum has been elected as Mexico's first woman president in a historic landslide win. The presidential election this year pitted Sheinbaum against her main rival, businesswoman Xochitl Gálvez. Ms. Sheinbaum will replace her mentor, outgoing President Andrés Manuel López Obrador on 1st October. Ms. Sheinbaum, a former energy scientist, has promised continuity, saying that she will continue to build on the policies made by Mr. López Obrador, further building on the welfare programs which have made the outgoing president very popular. Given her career as a scientist, one of the most scrutinized aspects of Sheinbaum's manifesto is her stance on climate change. Her election manifesto list of 100 commitments includes a goal to promote renewable energies through the construction of wind, solar, geothermal and hydrogen-based sources. In 2007, Sheinbaum contributed to a report on climate change that went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize of 2007. In her victory speech, Sheinbaum also highlighted what has set this Mexican election apart from previous ones. She told the cheering voters, "For the first time in the 200 years of the Mexican Republic, I will become the first woman president of Mexico." She said it was an achievement not just for her, but for all women. She said, "I've said it from the start, this is not just about me getting to the top office, it's about all of us getting there." She added, "I won't fail you." We bring you this report.
Prior to running for president, Ms. Sheinbaum was mayor of Mexico City, one of the most influential political positions in the country, and one that is seen as paving the way for the presidency.
Por primera vez en 200 años de la República, me convertiré en la primera mujer presidenta de México.
Ms. Sheinbaum, whose Jewish maternal grandparents immigrated to Mexico from Bulgaria fleeing the Nazis, had an illustrious career as a scientist before delving into politics. Her paternal grandparents hailed from Lithuania. Both of her parents were scientists, and Ms. Sheinbaum studied physics before going on to receive a doctorate in energy engineering. She spent years at a renowned research lab in California studying Mexican energy consumption patterns and became an expert on climate change. In 2018, she became the first female mayor of Mexico City, a post she held until 2023 when she stepped down to run for president. The election, which pitted Ms. Sheinbaum against Ms. Gálvez, has been described as a sea change for women in Mexico. Many women said that they were grateful to be alive to see a woman elected to the top office. They said, "Before we couldn't even vote, and when you could, it was to vote for the person your husband told you to vote for. Thank God that has changed," they told Reuters news agency, referring to the fact that women were only allowed to vote in the national elections in 1953. While the fact that the two frontrunners were women was widely celebrated, the campaign was marred by violent attacks. As well as a new president, voters were also electing all members of Mexico's Congress and governors in 8 states, the head of Mexico City's government, and thousands of local officials. And it was local candidates in particular who were targeted in the run-up to the vote. The government says more than 20 were killed across Mexico, although other surveys put the total at 37. One of the most brutal murders was the killing of Alfredo Cabrera, the mayoral candidate who was shot dead at a campaign rally in Mexico's southern Guerrero state, the last in a string of attacks in the lead-up to last Sunday's elections. Alfredo Cabrera was murdered on Wednesday in the town of Coyuca de Benitez. A video published by local media showed a person approaching him at a campaign event, shooting him several times at point-blank range. The government said on Tuesday that at least 22 people running for local office had been murdered since last September. The alleged attacker was shot dead at the scene by law enforcement officers. Ms. Gálvez harshly criticized the government and her rival in the presidential race for the violence which blights large parts of Mexico. She promised to be the bravest president, a president who does confront crime if elected. but failed to provide many details about how she would tackle the powerful criminal cartels which are behind much of the violence. How to tackle Mexico's violent cartels is going to be one of the many challenges facing Ms. Sheinbaum when she takes up office. She has said that it is important to tackle what she says are the roots of the violence and has promised to invest in welfare programs to prevent poor young Mexicans from being recruited by criminal groups. On relations with Mexico's northern neighbor, the United States, which at times have been testy under her predecessor in office, she said she would ensure there would be a relationship of friendship, mutual respect, and equality. But in a reference to the many Mexicans living and working in the US, she promised to always defend the Mexicans who are on the other side of the border. Many of those voting for her said they backed her and Mr. López Obrador's party program to alleviate poverty and wanted to see it continued.
Closer home in Pakistan, the former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been acquitted of leaking state secrets but will remain in jail because of a conviction in another case. In the run-up to elections in February, the 71-year-old, who was ousted as Prime Minister in 2022, was hit with 3 prison sentences for cases he insists were politically motivated. Khan was sentenced to 10 years in prison in January on charges of making public a diplomatic cable in 2022. The Islamabad High Court upheld his appeal and cleared him in that case on Monday, but he is not expected to leave prison for now. The former cricket star and his third wife Bushra are both serving prison sentences after a court ruled that their 2018 marriage had been un-Islamic and illegal as it came too soon after her divorce. The couple were also found guilty of corruption over gifts received during his term as Prime Minister. Even behind bars, the former cricket star remains a powerful force in Pakistani politics. We bring you this report.
When the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan was dragged out of a courthouse by police on charges of corruption on 9th May 2023, the reaction was unlike anything seen in Pakistan before. Enraged supporters took to the streets in cities across the country and buildings belonging to Pakistan's powerful military became the target. A shock to the institution widely known locally as the establishment. On the streets of the capital Islamabad, where Khan was arrested, protesters pulled down street signs, lit fires and threw stones. Scores of military monuments were vandalized. The military, which has long held sway over governance in the Muslim-majority country, swiftly labeled 9th May 2023 a black day. They have also described the protests as an attack on the army. 1 year on, many supporters of the former cricket star are still reeling from the physical and emotional wounds of the day's events. Hundreds were arrested for their involvement in the protests. Many of them told BBC they took to the streets peacefully and were not involved in the violence, but were nevertheless held without due process and mistreated while in detention. During the February elections, his Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI) party, which had been forced to run candidates as independents, emerged as the single largest bloc. However, they fell short of the majority and their rivals united to form a new government. In the so-called cipher case, the prosecution argued that Khan had leaked a classified cable sent to Pakistan's ambassador in Washington. At a rally in March 2022, the then Prime Minister appeared on stage waving a piece of paper that he said showed a foreign conspiracy against him. He didn't name the country but was subsequently highly critical of the US. Washington and Pakistani officials denied the claim. Prosecutors said Khan's actions amounted to leaking a classified document and damaging diplomatic relations. Many said they joined the protest because they felt that what happened to Imran Khan was wrong. They were telling the police, "Today, you have crossed the red line." Many Pakistanis have an emotional connection with Imran Khan. Many said that he was like a brother or a father to them. Abrar, another supporter who took to the streets after Khan's arrest, recalled that he left his house in Lahore immediately after seeing footage of Khan's arrest last May, as he felt his leader should not have been humiliated in this way. Khan is a cricketing icon in a country where the sport enjoys almost fanatical support. He brought glory to the country as captain when he led the national team to World Cup victory in 1992. Many Pakistanis have grown up idolizing him. He was elected PM in July 2018 but ousted in a parliamentary vote of no confidence 4 years later. Shortly before general elections this February, he was given several criminal convictions, barring him from standing. He's battling scores of legal cases, including charges for corruption and terrorism, but continues to be a powerful force dividing Pakistan. At least 10 people were killed and hundreds wounded during the May 9th protests, which authorities also said resulted in heavy losses. The crackdown after was effective and harsh. Protesters who were jailed have spoken of abuse and despair. Sometimes the prison felt more like a graveyard, like how we recite prayers at the graves of our loved ones. Perhaps our families were reciting the same prayers when they came to meet us, said Abrar, who was released early this year after spending 9 months in jail. My daughter would be crying and I could not wipe her tears, he added. Khan's foreign minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, was also sentenced to 10 years in prison. Both men were acquitted of the charges on Monday. While a year has passed, political watchers say Pakistan will not be able to move on until the grievances of the protesters are addressed. But the military remains firm in its determination to punish those responsible for the protests.
Georgia's MPs have voted to overturn a presidential veto on a contentious Transparency on Foreign Influence Bill, often dubbed the Foreign Agents Law, which has sparked several weeks of protests in the capital, Tbilisi. Under the legislation, media and non-governmental organizations that receive over 20% of their funding from abroad will have to register as organizations acting in the interest of a foreign power. They have to submit themselves to stringent audits or face punitive fines. A plenary session on Tuesday saw the vote pass with 84 votes for, mainly from the governing Georgian Dream Party, versus 4 votes against, with the opposition abstaining. Thousands of Georgians protested outside Parliament on Tuesday evening, many waving Georgian and EU flags. The law had already been passed on 14th May, but was then vetoed by pro-Western President Salome Zorabishvili. The law is expected to come into force in 60 days' time. The Georgian government argues it will ensure transparency of money flowing to support NGOs and protect Georgia from foreign interference. But its opponents, who have dubbed it Russian law because of its similarities with an existing law in Russia, believe the real reason for the legislation is to stifle dissent ahead of October's parliamentary elections. We bring you this report.
The EU said it deeply regretted the Georgian parliament's decision. EU officials had previously warned the bill could jeopardize further progress within the bloc. Georgia was granted candidate country status in December 2023. On Tuesday, as MPs debated the bill, people again gathered outside Parliament amid a heavy police presence. When the result of the vote was announced, many protesters shouted "Slaves and Russians." Since the protests began, police have repeatedly used force to disperse the protesters. Dozens of opponents of the Foreign Agents Law have reported being beaten up or intimidated, with insulting posters stuck outside their homes or threatening phone calls. Still, more than 6 weeks since the start of the protests, demonstrators, many of them young, feel there is no option other than to continue taking to the streets. Observers believe passing the Foreign Agents Law has turned into a battle for survival for Georgian dream, which has managed to alienate many of its traditional partners in the process. The US joined the EU in warning the law would entail consequences. The US State Department said last week that travel restrictions would be imposed on those who undermine democracy in Georgia, as well as their family members. But the authorities brushed the warnings off. The Secretary General of Georgian Dream, Tbilisi Mayor Kaka Kaladze, said there would never be a trade-off against the interests of the country. tens of thousands of Georgians had taken to the streets of the capital Tbilisi to protest. Protesters marched to the capital's Europe Square holding Georgian and EU flags, chanting "No to the Russian law." The law would target civil society organizations and independent media that receive foreign funding. Massive rallies have gripped the Black Sea Caucasus country for nearly a month after the ruling Georgian Dream Party reintroduced the bill. Despite a campaign of intimidation in which dozens of NGO workers, activists, and opposition politicians received threats or were physically assaulted, protesters turned up in their thousands. Opposition parties say the bill, coined Russian law after Russia's passing of similar legislation in 2012, will be used by the government to clamp down on dissent. The US has said the bill threatens free speech. In neighboring Russia, the law has since been used to marginalize voices challenging the Kremlin, including prominent cultural figures, media organizations, and civil society groups. Many Georgians in the rally do not want Russia's authoritarian-style leadership crossing into their country. Knowing that she had run out of options to stop the government from passing the bill, on Monday, Ms. Surabishvili presented a new charter which she said would be a plan to move Georgia towards Europe. The charter includes the abolition of laws which she said were harming Georgia's chances of EU membership, as well as significant reforms designed to depoliticize the justice system and security services.
Thanks so much for watching. Until we meet next time, stay blessed.